So I moved from the introduction and started reading the actual travel writing, the report, and it is really, but how they started on the horseback and the reason given for it. That today, along with my son, I started riding on a horseback towards these counties, and I think that I'm going to have to read and record all of it because I mean, maybe the route has changed. Maybe the counties have moved. Maps also move. We know that. And the British have been famous for doing it. I don't know how much they moved their own map. But point is not that. It's a report and very interesting, not just for these geographical locations, but he says, like, for example, he says Middlesex is very dull, boring, ugly, not dull, boring. That would be polite, ugly. And then he talks about an animal fair, and then he says that there were all the animals except for sheep. And the reason for riding a horse and not taking a coach or another vehicle, he cites, is because I want to get close to the laborers and the farmers and all of those places that don't have those broad paths for a vehicle to go to. That is how this travelogue begins, and I think that's very interesting. And I think that was like the first page, and I think that I will start from the third page right now because I read some bit of first and second, and I want to cover the most of it. And we all have limitations of time. It's not just about how much to read and how much to write and how much to do other things, but what books we pick up. This is very interesting. This county of Surrey presents to the eye of the traveler a greater contrast than any other county in England. It has some of the very best and some of the worst lands, not only in England but in the world. We were here upon those of the latter description. For 5 miles on the road towards Guildford, the land is a rascally common covered with poor health, except where the gravel is so near the top as not to suffer even the heath to grow. Here we enter the enclosed lands, which have the gravel at bottom, but a nice light black mold at top in which the trees grow very well. Through by lanes and bridleways we come out into the London road between Ripley and Guildford, and immediately crossing that road came on towards a village called Marrow. We came out into the road just mentioned at the lodge gates of a Mr. Weston, whose mansion and estate have just passed as to occupancy into the hands of some new man. At Merrow, where we came into the Epsom Road, we found that Mr. Webb Weston, whose mansion and park are a little further on towards London, had just walked out and left it in possession of another new man. This gentleman told us last year at the Epsom meeting that he was losing his income, and I told him how it was that he was losing it. He is said to be a very worthy man, very much respected, a very good landlord, but I dare say he is one of those who approved of yeomanry, cavalry, to keep down the Jacobins and levellers, but who, in fact, as I always told men of this description, have put down themselves and their landlords, for without them this thing never could have been done. To ascribe the whole to contrivance would be to give to Pitt and his followers too much credit for profundity. But if the knaves who assembled at the Crown and Anchor in the Strand in 1793 to put down by the means of prosecutions and spies those whom they called republicans and levellers, if these knaves had said, let us go to work to induce the owners and occupiers of the land to convey their estates and their capital into our hands, And if the government had corresponded with them in views, the effect could not have been more complete than it has thus far been. This yeomanry actually, as to the effect, drew their sword to keep the reformers at bay, while the tax eaters were taking away the estates and the capital. It was the sheep surrendering up the dogs into the hands of the wolves. Lord Onslow lives near Merrow. This is the man that was for many years so famous as a driver of four in hand. He used to be called Tommy Onslow. He has the character of being a very good landlord. I know he called me a D.D. Jacobin several years ago, only I presume because I was laboring to preserve to him the means of still driving four in hand, while he and others like him and their yeomanry cavalry were working as hard to defeat my wishes and endeavours. They say here that some little time back his lordship, who has at any rate had the courage to retrench in all sorts of ways, was at Guildford in a gig with one horse at the very moment when Spicer, the stockbroker, who was the chairman of the committee for prosecuting Lord Cochrane and who lives at Esher, came rattling in with four horses and a couple of Outridian. They relate an observation made by his lordship, which may or may not be true, and which therefore I shall not repeat. But, my lord, there is another sort of courage other than that of retrenching, that would become you in the present emergency, I mean political courage. This is so much of a political, writing. This is so much of political reporting that it's very fascinating. And especially the courage of acknowledging your errors, confessing that you were wrong when you called the reformers Jacobins and levelers. The courage of now joining them in their efforts to save their country, to regain their freedom, and to preserve to you your estate, which is to be preserved, you will observe, by no other means than that of a reform of the Parliament. It is now manifest, even to fools, that it has been by the instrumentality of a base and fraudulent paper money that loan jobbers, stock jobbers, and Jews have got the estates into their hands. With what eagerness in 1797 did the nobility, gentry, and clergy rush forward to give their sanction and their support to the system which then began and which has finally produced what we now behold. They assembled in all the counties and put forth declarations that they would take the paper of the bank and that they would support the system. Upon this occasion, the county of Surrey was the very first county, and on the list of signatures, the very first name was Onslow. There may be sales and conveyances, there may be recoveries, deeds, and other parchments, but this was the real transfer. This was the real signing away of the estates. There was an act of law, I think, that was just discussed, and to be honest, that I'll have to reread it to remember the way I want to present it to a PhD class. And I used to do it. It's just that when I'm reading these books, it's just taking me back to my days of PhD, and it's divine. So, and my MA thesis on the cup of tea turned into an endless political game. Wow. Thank you for sharing this beautiful book with me. I am honored. Please like and subscribe.